One of the tasks of a property manager is to ensure that all bills related to a specific tenancy are handled on time and that the trust account is kept up to date with any payments coming in and out of it. MantisProperty includes a really easy way to keep on top of all of these to ensure that you don't have to enter data in multiple places and that nothing is forgotten or lost. So what I'm going to do in this video is show you how a property manager can send bills to tenants and also to landlords, and then how to keep track of when they've been paid and ensure that everything's kept up to date in the trust account. So what we'll do is go into an existing tenancy, and there are basically two areas for bills. So there's tenant bills and landlord bills. Tenant bills are any bills that come in that the tenant is responsible for. These could be things such as water rates or electricity. Landlord bills are bills that the landlord is responsible for. So these could be things like maintenance and repairs. So I'll run through the tenant bills section first. Say for instance a water bill has come in and you need to send that to the tenant to get paid. Click on tenant bills and then you click upload new bill. In here you select the due date and then you select who the supplier is. You put in a description. So here we're going to say water bill. You put in how much it is and then you upload a scan of the bill or a PDF. If you have email to tenant ticked, then it will automatically send that bill to the tenant asking them to pay it with any payment instructions that you've set up as shown in the introduction to property management video. So once we do that, it'll just show you the details of what the email is so that you can adjust it before sending it to the tenant, and then you click send email. This will email the bill to the tenant, and it'll also show in the tenant portal if they log in there. So if we jump across to the tenant portal, say for instance the tenant is looking at their particular listing and they go into bills, they will see this new bill here, who it's from, what it's for, how much it is, and whether it's been paid or not. And they can click the view bill button to download the scan of that bill. It also shows them payment instructions here of what you've set up for your account so that they can make that payment. If we jump across to MantisProperty now, you'll see that this bill has been recorded, and you'll see these two buttons here, one for record tenant payment received and one for record supplier payment sent. The record tenant payment received, you click that when you've received the payment of that bill from the tenant. So we'll just go ahead and click that. That will then automatically show you this is what they're paying. If the tenant is paying multiple bills and there's multiple bills due, you'll be able to pick all of those, so you don't need to enter in separate transactions for each of those bills. And then you have the option to either record it in the ledger or keep it out of the ledger. So if you record it in the ledger, it'll automatically record that as a deposit into the ledger with all the relevant details related to that transaction. The other option is you can choose do not record in the ledger and just mark the bill as paid. So you might use this if you're entering in historical data into MantisProperty, but you don't want to affect any of your trust accounts that are in there. So here we'll choose record ledger, and then you choose the payment type, how you've actually received the payment. Received from, it will automatically set this as the tenant, but you can change this to whichever contact you want in case you've received it from another person besides the tenant. You can put in any description that you want. If you leave the description blank, it will automatically add the details of the bill that's been paid to the description anyway. And then it shows you the amount. That's based on which bills you've selected, and then you choose whether it's been received by the office or which property manager it's been received by. And then the final option here is to generate a receipt. So if you tick that, it allows MantisProperty to automatically create a receipt and email that back to the tenant to receipt that payment. So here we're going to click continue. And then here it comes up and it just asks who do you want to send the receipt to. It automatically populates it with the tenant's email address. So you can click email receipt and that will send them the receipt. Or you can click exit receipt screen and it will skip sending them the receipt. You can see now on this particular bill, it's showing that the tenant has paid that. If we jump across to the ledger, you'll also see that it shows here there's a deposit for that water bill and a credit to the trust account of $220, which was the amount of that bill. You can also click generate receipt here if you want to print off another receipt or resend that receipt to the tenant. So we'll go back into tenant bills. The next part is recording the supplier payment sent. So obviously once you've received the payment from that tenant, you need to pay the supplier. So that's where you click on this button. You'll also notice that under tenancies, there is a section here, process tenant bills. If we click on this, this will show all tenant bills that have not been marked as paid by the tenant and paid to the supplier. So this is a really handy screen for your property manager where they might be comparing it to a bank statement and just running through to mark off any bills that they've received payment from or any bills that they're paying off to the suppliers, all from one screen without having to go in and out of each specific tenancy. So what we're going to do here is record that the supplier payment has been sent. So again here, this works in a similar way to marking it as paid by the tenant, except this money is coming out of your ledger and going off to the supplier. So here, again, you have the option of recording it in the ledger, or you can not record it in the ledger and just mark it as the supplier being paid. Then you select the payment method of how you're paying the supplier. Then you choose whether it's being paid to the supplier or to the agency. So for instance, if there's a specific bill that the tenant needs to pay the agency in relation to this tenancy, you can select that. So here we've selected the supplier. It's automatically selected which supplier this bill was from. If you leave the description empty, again, it will automatically use the name of the bill that's being paid in the ledger. And then we click continue. Now you notice here, it was paid by the tenant and the supplier has been paid. This means if we go back into tenancies and into process tenant bills, there's nothing there because there's no bill payments that need to be dealt with now. You'll also notice that if we go back into the ledger, it shows here the payment, that it was paid to this particular supplier, what it was for. It shows the money coming out of the trust account and what the balance, running balance is in the trust account. So as you can see here, by marking these bills as paid and recording the information, it's automatically keeping the ledger for the trust account up to date. The same thing goes for landlord bills. This works exactly the same way as the tenant bills, except when you're uploading and sending a bill, it's being sent to the landlord instead of the tenant. Other than that, it's all pretty much the same. You'll notice under the tenancies screen, under process tenant bills, there's also the process landlord bills. Again, that will show any landlord specific bills that need to be attended to that have either not been paid by the landlord or the supplier has not been paid for them. The last section for recording these types of transactions is the process rent. So there's two ways you can get into this. The first way is within an actual tenancy by clicking on the rent tab, and this will show here any rent that's unpaid. If the rent has been unpaid, you can actually delete the transaction, you can manually add new rental transactions, or you can record the payment of that transaction. So here we can click on record payment. It'll show the rental periods that have not been paid yet, and it will automatically mark the one that you've selected. So say for instance, you have a tenant and they decide to pay, they owe 3 weeks worth of rent and they want to pay it all in one go. then you can select all three of those. You don't have to do them as three separate transactions. Again, like the bills, you can choose whether to record it in the ledger or just mark the rent as paid. It automatically populates all this information based on what the rental settings are, who the tenant is, etc. And then you have the option of generating the receipt, and you click continue to record that rental payment. So we'll record that, exit the rent receipt screen, and if we go into the ledger, you'll see now there's a deposit, rent paid for this, and what the period was, who it was paid by. Automatically updates the trust account ledger. Another way you can get into this is under tenants, and you go into process rent. This will give you a list of all rental payments that are currently due that have not been marked as paid yet. So again, this is a great way for the property manager to just sit down and go through all the rental payments and process all of those from a single screen, rather than going in and out of every tenancy to see what's due and to mark things as paid.